Hello guys, I'm Tom, and today we're going to discover who the Empty Man really is. One of the most mysterious, complex, and terrifying characters ever brought to the screen is the Empty Man, originating in the shadows of the human mind, with a deep connection to cosmic forces beyond our understanding. His presence awakens an existential terror that challenges our reality. That's why, in this video, I will explain in detail the story and origins of the Empty Man. For that, I will give you a summary of his story in the movie. Then I'll talk about his physical appearance, personality, and his incredible known abilities and weaknesses. The legend of the Empty Man is not the tale of an unknown creature, but rather the story of the creation of an empty being willing to receive the darkness of another entity that has finally made its presence known. The story of this being begins in Bhutan in 1995 on what is known as Day 1. Here, we meet a group of 4 friends, just a regular group, doing what many do, hiking, long walks, hills to climb, until reaching the top of a mountain. But at that very moment, when the air begins to blow strong, they notice something strange. A storm is approaching rapidly, so they must move fast if they want to reach civilization before the rain catches them. What's curious here is that Paul, the guy we see here, begins to hear a whistle that only he can hear. Deciding to investigate, he moves away from the group and ventures further into the mountain, falling into a crevice. His friends, worried, follow him, and it's Greg who goes down to check what's going on. What Greg didn't expect to find, to put it mildly, was something out of this world. Paul is standing in front of what seems to be a skeleton, but not just any skeleton, one that definitely isn't from this planet. Paul, completely entranced, whispers a phrase that leaves everyone in shock: "If you touch me, they will die." Greg, completely confused, doesn't know what to do but refuses to leave his friend there. So with all his strength, he drags him out of the cave. But the storm shows no mercy, and the group is forced to take shelter in an abandoned cabin. While they try to check on Paul, they find no injuries or signs of anything strange, except for a bone wrapped in cloth that Paul was carrying. Even more unsettling is what they find on his wrists: previous suicide attempts. Somehow, they begin to think Paul might be going through a deep depression. The storm keeps them trapped there, so there's no choice but to wait. While taking care of Paul, Ruth, driven by curiosity, blows on the bone, replicating the sound Paul had heard before. And just when they least expect it, they hear footsteps coming from the main room, but there's no one there. Day 2 arrives, and with it, more mystery. Greg and Fiona go out to seek help, leaving Ruth in charge of Paul, who remains completely motionless. Ruth, feeling that something isn't right, goes to search for help, and for some reason, she runs back to the cabin. When Greg and Fiona arrive, they find her paranoid, as if she's seen something indescribable. The next day, Paul has disappeared without a trace. So, on day 3, they go looking for him. They find him in front of the bridge they crossed to reach the cave, and there, amidst all this, Greg, tired of Paul's attitude, scolds him. Stop playing the victim. But the story doesn't end there. Ruth, in an unexpected turn, grabs a knife and kills Greg and Fiona before throwing herself into the void. And just like that, in a completely unexpected way, this chapter closes, leaving more questions than answers. Now we change settings and move to Missouri in 2018, where we meet James. This guy seems to be a loner, someone who has lost all contact with people, until Amanda, the daughter of an old friend, shows up at his house. And this is when things start to get strange. What's curious is that Amanda starts talking about something bigger, something deeper, something that defies logic. Nothing is real. What we know begins in our mind, and what we think with intention, we manifest. James, like any of us in his position, doesn't understand a word but decides to let it go, thinking it's just the ramblings of a young girl. However, what no one expected was that, after that visit, Amanda would disappear without a trace, and the only thing she left behind was a message written on the mirror. "The empty man made me do it." After talking to the police, James decides to investigate on his own. He finds a card with the name Pontifex Institute and the word tulpa written on it. With this, he sets off, visiting Amanda's school and asking about the legend of the empty man, an entity that, according to the story, you can summon if you go to a bridge, find a bottle, and blow on it with enough concentration. This may sound like a child's game, but James takes it seriously and continues his research. He discovers that all the kids who were at that bridge the night Amanda disappeared are also missing, and no one knows anything about them. So, when he reaches the bridge, he decides to blow on the bottle, looking for answers. And what he finds, dear friends, is not what he expected. Sewer pipes with 5 boys hanging, and on one of the walls, the same phrase, "The empty man made me do it." Meanwhile, the girl James interrogated is about to enter a sauna, and sure enough, the shadow Ruth saw appears, and well, let's just say the poor girl doesn't have much luck. Although it all seems to indicate a suicide, the officer investigating Amanda's disappearance informs James that the same phrase has appeared again, this time in the spa. Back home, James remembers the words of the girl from the spa. "If you enter the empty man's ritual, the first night you'll hear it, the second night you'll see it, and the third night you'll feel it." James, being the good investigator he is, starts digging into the Pontifex Institute, discovering that it was an apocalyptic cult that believed in the end of the world, and they used occultism to achieve their goal. The worst part, it seems that all of this is connected, and not in the way James thought. In 1991, 6 members of this society died in a dark occult experiment. The location was a remote cabin on the outskirts of a forest in Missouri. As he investigates, he discovers something even more unsettling, the word tulpa. James finds out that a tulpa is not simply a myth. It is a being created through the formula thought plus concentration plus time equals flesh. In other words, with enough focus and dedication, you can bring a being to life just using your mind. As his investigation progresses, something is revealed that changes everything he thought he knew. Amanda's mother, his friend, and James had an affair while he was still married, although Amanda never knew about it. Or at least, that's what she believes. But in this game of shadows, who can know the truth? That night, for the first time, James hears the empty man, the being he has been chasing in his mind, but he still cannot see him. It is only the beginning of what's to come. The next day, he travels to the headquarters of the Pontifex Institute in Missouri, a place that doesn't seem like an institute at all. There, he sneaks into a conference that, at first, appears to be a meaningless talk about philosophical topics, but soon it is revealed to be something far more sinister. A mysterious man with a disconcerting smile begins speaking of things that seem to mean something. But if you analyze them closely, they really say nothing. "You've never lost anything, because nothing exists," says the man. "Only the great and binding nothing of things exists." These words, although they seem like a jumble of incoherencies, are direct messages from the empty man, signals of the truth that is about to be revealed. Intrigued, James approaches the man and directly asks about the empty man. The answer is even more baffling. Just as people feed on the atmosphere and the biosphere, thoughts feed on a place called the noosphere. Thoughts can be brought into our world through certain vectors, but that requires an intermediary. James realizes that reality is collapsing before him, but he doesn't fully understand how. He decides to continue investigating and sneaks into the deeper parts of Pontifex. There, he finds a group that seems to be conducting a ritual, one they repeat over and over without ceasing. They are attempting to create something from the mind, from thought. James, seeing all this, seeks answers, but does not find what he was expecting. In his frustration, He meets someone from the conference, a man who gives him a clue. A camp in a Missouri forest is where the darkest secrets are hidden. The camp where everything happens. James doesn't take long to get there, and what he finds are files belonging to Amanda and her friends, confirming that they were somehow already involved with the Pontifex Institute. Among the documents, he finds a folder with his own name, but it is empty. Why? What does this mean? In an even more unsettling twist, James discovers an old VHS tape. Upon watching it, he sees a chilling ritual. 6 cult members performing an invocation with the intention of creating a tulpa. However, something goes wrong. The being they invoke seems defective, an incomplete version, a mental Frankenstein. This being creates a mural, a skeleton that, as James looks at it, seems strangely familiar. Who or what is this being? And what happened to the summoner? As James leaves the cabin, he finds a gigantic circle of people dancing around a bonfire while singing a strange song, Nyarlathotep, a riddle that, like everything in this story, is only partially revealed, or maybe never fully revealed. Suddenly, the atmosphere changes. The fire rises with a supernatural force, and the sky begins to warp. Reality itself seems to bend under the collective power of these beings. The fire abruptly goes out, and the cult members move toward James, slowly advancing before charging at him like a horde. James barely manages to escape, rushing to his car. But when he returns to civilization, the revelations don't stop. James brings the documents he found to a police officer, only to be suspiciously brushed aside. Something is wrong, and he knows it. That night, James finally sees the empty man, but he cannot do anything. He remembers the cult's words. The real encounter will take place only on the 3rd night. So, the next day, he decides to follow the man who had pointed him to the camp. This leads him to a hospital, where the group of cultists enters the room of a comatose patient. A patient who, surprisingly, turns out to be Paul, the man James had encountered at the beginning, in the cave. The interrogation doesn't take long. James confronts the sectarian, demanding coherent answers. And it is here that the unthinkable is revealed. Paul is no ordinary man. He is an intermediary, an antenna for the cosmic forces that govern the new sphere. The other, an indescribable entity, sends messages through Paul, a man chosen every 1,000 years to serve as the vessel of the prophet. This being, the herald, resides in Paul, and in order for its mission to be completed, it needs to find a new vessel. Returning to the Pontifex headquarters, James uncovers something disturbing. Everything related to his life, from his birth to the tragedy he suffered, has been documented by the cult. What he thought were genuine memories are nothing more than pieces of a carefully crafted script. James was not created. He was projected. The story of his life, his suffering, all of it was an invention designed to give him tragedy, and therefore, make him materialize as a tulpa. The great revelation arrives. James is not who he thought he was. He is not a real human being. He is the tulpa that this cult has been seeking, the perfect vessel for the prophet. Having failed in their first attempt with the bald man, and due to the lack of a convincing tragedy, they created James, a being destined to serve as the empty man. And so, when James finally confronts the prophet, he becomes the vessel that was needed. The prophet possesses him, and the darkness that had been accumulating in the shadow of existence begins to overflow, ushering in an era of terror and despair. In a certain sense, James is the empty man, but not because he has always been that entity. Rather, he was created to become its new vessel. The film reveals that James was never a real person. He was a tulpa, a mental construct created by the Pontifex Institute sect for the purpose of serving as the empty man's new host. All his memories, his past, and his identity were implanted in him, making him believe he was an ordinary man with a tragic personal story. However, his existence had only one purpose: to replace the former prophet, Paul, whose body was already collapsing due to the presence of the empty man. The empty man is a cosmic entity that influences the human mind through fear and despair. Its origin is not exactly explained, but the film suggests that it comes from the noosphere, a dimension formed by the collective consciousness of humanity. From there, this being manifests in our reality through human hosts, and the cult worships it as a source of power and knowledge. The other is the pure form of this cosmic presence, something that exists beyond physical reality, and the cult attempts to channel it. In terms of cosmic horror, it resembles the gods of H.P. Lovecraft, beings so vast and alien to our understanding that their mere existence can drive a person insane. The end of the film is unsettling because it shows how James, upon discovering the truth, has no escape. He was created to become the new empty man, and the cult pushes him to accept his fate. In other words, he was the empty man in potential, and now he becomes its full manifestation on Earth. Now that we've thoroughly covered his story, I want to talk to you about the physical appearance of the empty man, what we know about his personality and behavior, and I'll explain his incredible abilities, as well as how to survive and defeat this creature. The empty man is a cosmic entity whose appearance is ambiguous and changes depending on how it manifests in reality. Throughout the movie The Empty Man, we see it in different forms, but never fully defined, which reinforces its Lovecraftian nature as an incomprehensible and terrifying being. The first physical manifestation of the empty man appears in the opening sequence of the movie when a group of hikers in Bhutan discovers a giant skeletal figure inside a cave. This entity seems to be the first vessel of the empty man we encounter in the story. Its body is cadaverous, with the skin almost clinging to the bones, as if it were dead but still conscious. It has an unsettling posture, with its limbs drawn in, exuding an aura of absolute terror. After the encounter with the entity in Bhutan, Paul becomes the human vessel for the empty man. His appearance deteriorates drastically over time, his skin becoming pale, sickly, and thin, as if his body were decomposing while still alive. In the hospital scene, we see him bedridden, with a face consumed by suffering and madness. His eyes appear vacant, and his voice is slow and disturbing, as if possessed. In some scenes, the empty man manifests as a dark, diffuse presence that haunts its victims. It can be perceived as an amorphous shadow, moving rapidly and unnaturally. In one particular scene, a large humanoid silhouette with an oppressive presence is seen, almost like a specter that crawls between reality and the void. It doesn't always appear physically, but rather hints at its presence through the minds of its victims, making them hear whispers and pushing them towards suicide or madness. It is felt in bursts of terror, distorting the environment and affecting the perception of reality. When James is revealed as the next manifestation of the empty man, his appearance still resembles that of a human, but his fate is to become a new vessel. It is implied that eventually his body will undergo the same deterioration as Paul's, showing signs of decomposition and physical wear. The empty man does not have a personality in the human sense, as it is a cosmic and inhuman entity. It shows no emotions, desires, or individual motivations. Its behavior is more like that of an inevitable force that corrupts the mind and reality of those who come into contact with it. It is a manipulative and stealthy presence, not attacking directly, but exerting its influence through fear and suggestion. It whispers in the minds of its victims, making them doubt their own identity and perception of reality. It does not communicate with clear words, but with symbols, implanted thoughts, and disturbing visions. The empty man needs a human vessel to manifest more tangibly in the physical world. It cannot fully exist without a proper host, which is why the Pontifex Institute cult is responsible for creating and preparing these vessels, like Paul before his deterioration and James at the end of the movie. Its influence is relentless, and those who fall under its control lose all autonomy. It not only consumes their minds, but also turns them into mere instruments of its will. It does not act with anger or pleasure, but with a terrifying inevitability, as if its existence and expansion were simply a law of reality. The empty man possesses supernatural abilities that make him a terrifying and almost omnipresent entity. His main power is mental and psychic influence, allowing him to infiltrate people's minds, whispering thoughts that slowly corrupt them. He can induce hallucinations, distort reality, and control the emotions of his victims, driving them to despair, madness, or even suicide. His connection to the noosphere grants him the ability to alter reality through the collective mind, as seen in the creation of James as a tulpa. This ability means he can manipulate the perception of the world and shape the existence of individuals according to his will. The empty man cannot fully exist in the physical world without a vessel, so he needs to possess and wear down human bodies to manifest. His hosts, like Paul and later James, completely lose their identity, becoming mere channels for his existence. He also exerts control over the Pontifex Institute cult and its followers, who act in sync, as if they were a single mind connected to his influence. He can induce mass suicides, making people lose the will to live without resistance, demonstrating his absolute dominance over his victims. His existence transcends time and space, as he operates in a higher dimension of collective consciousness. He is not a physical entity in the conventional sense, so he cannot be destroyed or stopped. He functions more like an inevitable force that will always find a way to manifest in reality. His nature makes him a manifestation of cosmic horror, a being that cannot be understood or fought, only accepted as a presence that transcends logic and human comprehension. Surviving and defeating the empty man is extremely difficult, as he is not a physical entity in the traditional sense, but a cosmic force that operates in the noosphere and manipulates the minds of his victims. However, there are several theoretical strategies that could work to resist or even stop his influence. The first rule for survival would be to avoid any interaction with the Pontifex Institute cult, as they are the ones responsible for summoning the empty man through specific rituals. The empty man manifests through the human mind, so the first step would be to stay away from his symbols, writings, rituals, or any type of contact with the cult. Most of the empty man's victims fall under his influence after knowing too much or even unintentionally participating in his rituals. Since the empty man feeds on fear, despair, and the mental vulnerability of his victims, an important defense would be to develop psychic resistance. This could involve using advanced mind control techniques, such as deep meditation, controlling intrusive thoughts, and building mental barriers to prevent manipulation. The idea would be to strengthen the mind against external influences, which could include creating mental protection to stop the empty man from implanting his ideas and controlling the victim's perception. The Pontifex Institute cult acts as the main conduit for the manifestation of the empty man in reality. So if the cult and its followers were eliminated, his influence on the physical world could be weakened. This would involve not only eliminating the cult members, but also destroying any written records, recordings, or symbols related to the entity. If the cult ceases to exist or is dismantled, the connection to the empty man could be broken, which would reduce his power. The empty man feeds on despair and fear, and one of the ways he gains power is through suggestion. The ability to resist despair and maintain sanity could be key. If an individual maintains a strong sense of rationality, even in the face of the impossible, they could avoid falling into the states of paranoia and distress that allow the entity to infiltrate their mind. The empty man needs a physical vessel to manifest in the world. In the movie, Paul is the original vessel, and later, James is prepared to take his place. If the process of transferring the entity is interrupted, or if the vessel is destroyed before the possession is complete, the empty man could become trapped or temporarily weakened. In theory, finding a way to isolate his host and avoid the influence of the cult could prevent the empty man from taking physical form, which would limit him. If the empty man is a tulpa, then it means the empty man himself could be a construct of the collective consciousness. In some interpretations of the tulpa concept, if an entity created by the mind loses its source of belief, it ceases to exist. This suggests that if enough people were convinced that the empty man does not exist or that his power is an illusion, his influence could weaken until it disappears. Destroying the cult's faith in him could be a way to eradicate him. Additionally, if the empty man comes from the noosphere, it might be possible to use the same principle against him. The noosphere is a layer of reality formed by the thought and collective consciousness of humanity. In theory, if a countertulpa could be created, a collective thought, to counteract or seal him in his dimension, it could limit his ability to manifest. This would involve a sufficiently large group of people focusing on the idea of a being or force that would neutralize the empty man. Such a concentration of thought could weaken his influence on physical reality. On a more complex level, if humanity were to modify its perception of reality through advancements in neuroscience, artificial intelligence, or even transhumanism, the influence of the empty man could become irrelevant. If the human mind stops operating the way it does now, the connection to the noosphere could be blocked, preventing the empty man from influencing the human mind. In summary, defeating the empty man would require a combination of mental resistance, the elimination of the cult that worships him, manipulation of the noosphere, and possibly the use of technological or philosophical tools to modify the perception of reality. His existence is a reflection of Lovecraftian cosmic horror, meaning that his threat cannot be eliminated by conventional methods. However, if his power comes from the human mind, then the key to defeating him might also be found within the mind itself. And that's all we know so far about the entity known as the empty man. Honestly, this being reminded me of many films about invocations or cults worshipping ancient beings, but I liked how they explained at the end who the empty man was and why all these events were happening. It helped me understand a little better the focus these groups had. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Did you already know about the empty man? Do you think such a terrifying and complex creature could really exist? And finally, if you encountered this being, what would you do? Share your answers to these questions and your overall thoughts on the empty man. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you liked it, share it to support the channel, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of my new videos.